Anyway, we're going to continue our study in the book of Job. If you want to take your Bibles to the book of Job. We've been studying in the book of Job for several weeks now, and we're going to continue on as we study. You've always heard people say the term the patience of Job. They say, oh, so-and-so, he's got the patience of Job. Well, we understand what the patience of Job means when we study the story of Job. I mean, this guy was going through some very, very deep waters, very discouraging times that he could not understand why he was going through these times. And yet, he did not turn back his faith on God. Oh, he got discouraged a few times along the way. I mean, after all, he's human just like you and I. But he never did turn his back on his faith in God. He never did blame God foolishly for what was going on. But he did struggle with a lot of things in life. And the book of Job was written to us in order to show us how a person can still love God and be faithful to God through sufferings. And the purpose of Job's sufferings was that God wanted to prove to Satan and to the world that a man would still love God even though he goes through deep trials and deep testings and physical problems and physical ailments here in this life. So the book of Job is an excellent book to study to help us not only in our lives when we have trouble, but to help us to help other people that are having trouble in their lives. And so that's why we're studying this book of Job, and that's why we go through this time and study it. It's sometimes you can read it and you think, my goodness, how in the world could this man take all this stuff? But God was giving us the story in His Word to teach us how you and I can deal with problems. Let's have a word of prayer and we'll get into our lesson for today. Father, we do thank you for this day. Lord, thank you for these dear faithful people who came early to church this morning to be a part of Sunday school. Lord, I thank you for this opportunity that we have to gather here at our church. Thank you for the way that you've blessed our church. Thank you for the way that you've watched over our church and helped us financially and protected these buildings, Lord. Now today we gather together here at this place that you have provided, this place that you have blessed over the decades. Lord, thank you again for this time. Help us as we open your book to learn something to help us to be better Christians. In Jesus' name, amen. Brother Bill, you got those prayer request forms? Okay, if you have a prayer request that you would like Pastor to pray for specifically, Pastor takes time each week to pray for the needs of the ones of our church. If you raise your hand, Brother Bill will get this form. Just fill it out. You don't have to put your name on it if you don't want to. You can turn it in anonymous. But fill it out and put your prayer. We got one down here, Brother Bill. Just fill it out and put your prayer requests. These go to Pastor directly, and he takes time each week to pray for special prayer requests from the needs of the people in our church. All the adult Sunday school classes do this on a weekly basis. So raise your hand if you'd like one of those forms, and Brother Bill will get it to you. And at the end of the class, Brother Bill is usually standing right there in the back. Just see him and hand it to him, and he makes sure that the pastor gets to that. Okay, the book of Job. Let me just briefly give a very brief, I don't want to go through these lessons each time every week, but I do want to catch people up who are maybe missed the last time we met or something like that. But the book of Job starts out where God was talking to Satan one day, and he says, have you considered my servant Job? He's an upright man, and he loves me, and he stays away from evil. And Satan said to God, he said, yeah, but you know what? He says, the only reason he loves you is because you're good to him. Job had 10 children, he had a lot of cattle, he had a lot of land, and those are the three things that the people in the Eastern culture, that's how they determine a man's wealth, by how many children you had, how much land you have, and how much cattle and animals that you own. And so Job was a very wealthy man. So God's bragging on Job to Satan and says, oh, have you considered my servant Job? This guy is great. And Satan says, yeah, you know what, though, if you take away all the blessings that you're giving him, he'll curse you to your face. And God said, oh, really? He says, okay, I'll tell you what, I'm going to let you do that. He says, go ahead and do that. And so what happened was Job's 10 children died. His cattle were taken by the enemy. Some of the cattle were destroyed. And Job did not curse God. He kept his integrity. So then another time, God and Satan had a conversation, and God said to Satan, well, now what do you think about my servant Job? I told you he loves me and he wouldn't curse me to my face. And Satan said, yeah, okay, so we took away all his possessions, but you touch his body and you make him personally have to suffer, and he'll turn on you. And God tells Satan, he says, okay, he says, go ahead and do that, but don't kill him. He said, you can do whatever you want to him, but don't kill him. So here's Job upon this earth. He's just lost his 10 children. He's just lost all of his cattle, all of his animals, and he doesn't understand why. God never did explain to Job why this was happening. And so then Satan comes down and strikes Job with a disease of boils and sores all over his body. Some Bible scholars call it elephantiasis. I don't know if it's elephantiasis. I don't know if it was leprosy, but whatever it was, he had sores on his body from the top of his head all the way down to the bottom of his feet. And God allowed Satan to do that. Now, in both of these instances, we can learn a very important lesson, and that is that you and I as Christians understand that nothing happens in our life without God's approval. In order for Satan to do those things to Job, God had to tell him, okay, you can do that. Because Satan cannot do those kind of... So Satan touches Job's body with these boils, these running sores from the top of his head down to the bottom of his feet. And we see him in the story of Job, we see him sitting at the edge of the city, over in the garbage dump, over in the ash heap, and he's sitting in the ashes trying to get some relief for those boils, and he's taking a broken potsherd or broken part of a clay vase or whatever, and he's scraping his body, trying to get the itch away, and he's scraping the ooze from the sores on his body. And so now we see Job, who at one time was probably one of the most prominent men in the city where he lived. Everybody looked up to Job. He was a wealthy man. He was a man of wisdom. He loved God, and he had a good reputation with the people. And now we see this poor man sitting at the edge of the city in the ash heap, scraping his sores, because God wanted to prove to Satan that a man can love God even though he goes through difficult circumstances, which he does not understand. So Job's sitting in the ash heap, and all of a sudden he looks down the way, and here comes 3 of his friends. And I'm sure in his heart, he must have thought, well, hey, here comes 3 of my friends. What a wonderful thing it is that some friends are going to come with me. So 3 of Job's friends come, and they sit with him at the ash heap. They sit with him for 7 days. Nobody says a word. They're just sitting there, and they're just being with Job. And there we learned a lesson about how that sometimes when people are going through difficult times, that we don't know what to say to them. We feel funny. We don't want to go visit them because we don't know for sure if we'd say the right thing, or how do you encourage somebody who's just lost a loved one, or what do you say to somebody who's going through a deep dark trial, or maybe they're suffering with cancer and all that. Well, the Bible teaches us here when Job's friends came to him, they were just there with him. They were there to support him. They were there to be with him. They didn't have to say anything. And after 7 days, then Job starts talking, and he gets into a little bit of the mully grubs, and he says he wished as he was never born, and he wished that maybe he had died from the womb. And now, he did not curse God, and he did not lose his faith in God, but he got discouraged, and naturally so. I mean, how would you like to go through all that kind of a thing? Well, then one of his friends spoke up and talked to him. And that was the last time we met. We talked about Eliphaz. One of his friends came and said, Job, he says, God blesses righteous people upon this earth. And God takes care of the people who love him and those people who are righteous. And God punishes the wicked people upon the earth. So Job, you know what? You must have really done something wrong for this all to happen to you. Now, you and I know why this is happening to Job, because we got to read the story. We saw how that the reason that Job had all these things happen to him was not because Job did something wrong. It was because God wanted to prove to Satan that a man who loves God will continue to love God even when things go wrong in his life. Even when things don't go as planned, and even when things don't go as they had previously gone, that a man will still love God. So Job has all these things happen to him. His friends come and tell him, well, Job, you must have really been bad. You got to, look, Job, dig down deep in your conscience. Stop and think, Job. Well, I mean, sure, you must have done something terrible in order for this to happen. Or sometimes God brings testings to people in order to make them better, in order to make them stronger. Well, Job was probably one of the greatest men that lived in that part of the country. And so these fellows are saying, well, Job, you must not have been all that we thought you were if God wants to try to do something like this to make you better. So either you sinned, or God is testing you and is giving you these trials in order to make you a better person, which means there must be some kind of a flaw in your life that God's trying to correct, and Job, you need to figure out what it was. And so here's these friends, and I say friends with quotes on the front and the back side of that word, because they really, all they were trying to do was give Job their theory. Now, we need to be very careful. When we see somebody who is suffering, we need to be careful not to judge them or try to figure out why they're suffering. Well, so-and-so's had, one of their children went bad, or so-and-so's just had this bad disease, or I know Mr. So-and-so just lost his job, and God's punishing him for something. No, wait a minute. You don't know, and I don't know why things happen to people. The book of Job is a very good teaching tool, not only to teach us to go to people who are struggling and suffering and just be with them and help to support them, but also the book of Job teaches us that we don't know why God does the things he does to people. And we don't understand everything. We can come up with our theories, just like Job's friends did, but they're wrong. Job's friends were so far wrong, they were completely off base. They told Job, you must have sinned in order for God to do all. He took your 10 children, he took all your cattle, then now you got these sores all over your body. You're sitting over here at the edge of the city in the ash heap. Job, you must have really done something bad. Now, maybe you don't want to tell us, Job, but you need to come clean with God in your conscience, and you need to confess your sin to God. And then, you know what? If you'll do that, his friend told him, he said, if you'll confess your sin to God and admit what you've done wrong, then God will turn around and bless you, and he'll start blessing you again like you did before. And that was a very subtle way for Satan to slip in his desires. Because see, Satan told God, he said, the only reason Job loves you, and the only reason Job serves you, and the only reason Job does what he does for you is because you bless him all the time. And so now his friend is trying to get Job to admit to God that he has done something wrong and that he has sinned, and that would God please forgive him and restore unto him the life that he had before. But Job didn't do that. And thank God that he didn't. Because first of all, we know that Job didn't do anything wrong. Job didn't sin, and which his friends thinks is the cause of all this stuff that he's gone through. And had Job confessed sin to God in an effort to get God to turn around and bless him, he would have fallen right into the trap that Satan wanted him to fall into. And that was that Satan told God that the only reason Job serves you and the only reason Job loves you is because you're good to him and you've blessed him with all these things in life. And so if Job turns around in his discouragement and would come to God and confess, to God that he thinks maybe he's done something wrong, and would God please bless him, Satan would have said, aha, see, God, I told you. The only reason he's confessing this sin is because he wants to get back on your good side so you'll bless him again. Well, thank God Job didn't do that. So after his first friend tells him his theory, how that you must have been doing something wrong, you must have some sin in your life, you need to confess that sin to God. In chapter 6 in Job, we see Job is going to answer his friend. His friend has just got done telling him this phony theory that he came up in his mind, how that Job must have done something wrong, he needs to confess his sin to God. And in Job chapter 6, we read, look at verses 1 to 3. But Job answered and said, oh, that my grief were thoroughly weighed and my calamity laid in the balances together. For now it would be heavier than the sand of the sea. Therefore my words are swallowed up. What Job is saying here is, he says, fellas, you just don't understand how heavy this thing is upon me. And can you imagine? I mean, even his wife, in her discouragement over all that happened, told Job, why don't you just curse God and die? And she just felt bad for him to see all these things happen to him. And she said, Job, you know what? You're going through all these discouraging things, and look at all these things that happen to you. Why don't you just curse God? God will get mad at you. He'll kill you. Go on to heaven. It's got to be better than what you're doing, suffering through now. But there again, Job didn't listen to his wife, because in Job's heart of hearts, he knows that he, as far as he's concerned, he did not do anything wrong. But yet he's struggling in his mind. He's got this mental gymnastics he's going through in his mind. Okay, I don't think that I've done anything wrong, at least nothing that I know that I need to confess to God for. But yet God has delivered all these calamities in my life, and I don't understand why. And my friends and my colleagues keep telling me, well, God blesses the righteous people and punishes the evil, therefore I must have done something evil. And so here's Job in his mind going back and forth, trying to reconcile in his mind, why is he going through all of these things when God was blessing him along the way and everything was going so well? And he says to his friends here in these first 3 verses, he says he doesn't know what he's done to deserve this, and his calamity is like the sand it's like you took all the sand on all the beaches of the world and placed it upon him. He said, my calamity weighs down upon me. I'm sure every one of you have been to a place in your life where you've had discouragement come in, where you get discouraged maybe about a health situation or a financial discouragement. And when you're going through that time, everything feels heavy. I mean, it's a struggle just to get out of bed in the morning. It's a struggle just to wake up and see your family, or to go to work and put on a fake smile on your face and try to go through your day, because it's like one fellow describes it, it's like walking through peanut butter. It's every step is difficult and every step is hard. And Job is saying to his friends, he said, if all of my calamities were weighed in the balances together, it would be heavier than the sand of the sea. Therefore, my words are swallowed up. Job says, I don't know what to say. I'm going through this deep calamity, and it's so heavy upon me, my words are swallowed. I even have a hard time describing to you guys what I'm going through. But then look at verse 4 and 5. He says, for the arrows of the Almighty are within me. The poison whereof drinketh up my spirit. The terrors of God do set themselves in array against me. Doth the wild ass bray when he hath grass, or loweth the ox over his fodder? What Job is saying is, I'm crying for help, fellas. I'm hurting and I need help. And he said, I would not be crying if I did not need the help. And Job says, I feel like God's painted a target on my back, and he's shooting arrows at me. He says, and I don't understand why. He says, I don't understand why I'm going through all this. In verse 5, he says, doth the wild ass bray when he hath grass, or loweth the ox over his fodder? In other words, if an animal has food, he's not going to be crying that he's hungry. He says, fellas, I'm telling you, I'm hurting. And I'm hurting because I don't understand why I'm going through this. If I wasn't going through this and I wasn't hurting, I wouldn't be telling you all these things. So Job is getting a little frustrated with his friends because they really weren't helping him along the way at all. Then look at verse 6. He says, can that which is unsavory be eaten without salt? Or is there any taste in the white of an egg? The things that my soul refuseth to touch are as my sorrowful meat. He says, tasteless meat and the white of an egg needs help. It needs salt. You know how, you ever eat an egg without anything on it? Just take a boiled egg but put salt on it, and it helps a lot. And Job was saying, look, I need help. I need the salt of my friends. I need the salt of some consolation. I need something to help me so that I can deal with this problem that I'm going through, just like I need some salt on an egg in order for me to eat an egg and have it taste good in my mouth. He says, fellas, I'm in trouble and I need help. And then look at verse 8. He says, oh, that I might have my request, that God would grant me the thing that I long for, even that it would please God to destroy me, that he would let loose his hand and cut me off. Job says, I'm miserable. I want to die. I can't believe I'm going through all this. I'm struggling in my mind to try to figure this all out, and I need some help. And his friend Eliphaz didn't give him any help. He told me, well, you must have done something wrong. You need to confess your sin to God. And Job's saying in his mind, he says, I'm trying to reconcile with this thing, and I can't find out where I think I've done something wrong that I need to confess to God. Then look at verse 10. He said, in other words, he said, if God would cut me off at the end of verse 9, he said, then should I have my comfort. Yea, I would harden myself in sorrow, let him not spare, for I have not concealed the words of the Holy One. What is my strength that I should hope? And what is my end that I should prolong my life? He says, I've not hidden anything from God. I've not concealed a single thing from God. Fellas, I've been sitting in this ash heap for 7 days after all these things happened to me. And I'm sitting here, and I've talked to God about everything that I can possibly think of in my life. I've not held back anything. That's where he says, I've not concealed anything from God. And he says, I'm losing my strength. And he says, and what is my end that I should prolong my life? He says, why should I continue on this way? I don't want to live the rest of my life this way, sitting here at the ash heap with all these sores all over my body, wondering why God did this to me. He says, I need help. I need help to find out why this has happened to me, and I need somebody to pull alongside of me and give me a hand. Then look at verse 12. He said, is my strength as the strength of stones, or my flesh as brass? Is not my help in me, and the wisdom quite driven far from me? He says, you guys think I'm invincible? You think I'm like stone and I'm like brass and nothing's going to hurt me? Well, you see, Job, back in the day when he was wealthy and everything was going well, people looked up to him. People who were going through problems used to come to Job for help. They would come to Job for advice. And now here's Job sitting in an ash heap, and he's telling his friends, he says, I know you all remember me, and you all know me for a long time. He says, but you know what? Guys, I'm not invincible. My flesh is not like stone. Things just don't bounce off of me, and everything's going to be fine. And what he says, my strength is my strength the strength of stones, or my flesh is of brass? He said, you guys think that you think I'm some kind of superhuman that I can go through all this thing? He says, I'm in trouble and I'm hurting. And then look what he says in verse 14. To him that is afflicted, pity should be shown from his friend, but he forsaketh the fear of the Almighty. He goes, I need you guys to help me. They came to Job as friends. Nice that they came. Nice that they sat with him for 7 days and they didn't say anything to him. They waited for Job to be the first one to talk. But then when they did have their chance to speak, as this first fellow Eliphaz did, instead of showing Job pity, and instead of saying, Job, man, look, I love you. I wish I could do something for you. And I think you're a great guy. And we'll get through this thing together. And I'll pray with you. And instead, Eliphaz comes with the attitude of the folded arms that, you must have done something wrong. And Job's telling him, fellas, I don't need that at this point. I need somebody to come and help me. I need somebody who loves me to come and sit by me. Look at verse 15. He says, my brethren have dealt deceitfully. As a brook and as the stream of brooks they pass away, which are blackish by the reason of the ice, and wherein the snow is hid. What time they wax warm, they vanish. When it is hot, they have consumed out of their place. He says, you guys, you know what you're like? You're like a fellow that's thirsty in the wintertime, and he goes and he tries to get a drink out of a stream or a brook, and it's covered over with a layer of ice, and you can see the water underneath the ice, but you can't get to it. And then, when the warm weather comes to where you can get to the water, the warm weather takes and vanishes the water away. He said, that's what you guys are like to me. He says, I need some refreshment. I need some encouragement. I need some help. But you guys are like water underneath ice that you can't get to, or when the warm weather comes, the water vanishes away, and then you're no help. He says, look at verse 17. He says, what time they wax warm, they vanish. When it is hot, they are consumed out of their place. He says, and the time when I would need the water the most, when it's hot outside, when everybody's thirsty, and the sun's baking the water, and the water's evaporating, and when I need it the most, what happens? You guys are gone. He said, and so Job here in his frustration in chapter 6 is answering the fact that his friends just got done telling him that they think they know what's wrong with him and that he's got the sin in his life and needs to confess his sin. And Job's saying, guys, I need you just to be a help to me. I don't need you to give me your opinion. I don't need you to tell me your theory about what's going on with me. I need you guys to help me. I need you guys to pull alongside of me. I need you to be a refreshment to me. I need you to pray with me. And so here we get a beautiful story in chapter 6 as to how we can help people who are going through deep times. We don't have to come up with the answers. The truth of the matter is, most time we don't know the answers. So the only thing we can do is pull alongside somebody who's struggling like that and try to be a help to them. Give them some encouraging words. Tell them you're praying for them. Bring them a meal. Bring them something to comfort them. And that's what Job is saying. He says, I need comfort. I need help. I need somebody who isn't going to come and judge me or give me their opinion as to what they think's wrong with me. I just need somebody to come along like a cool drink of water and on a hot day. He said, and you guys come and you guys are like a bunch of water that vanishes in the hot sun. And when I need it the most, it's gone. Then look at verse 18. The paths of their way are turned aside. They go to nothing and perish. The troops of Tema looked, and the companies of Sheba waited for them. They were confounded because they had hoped. Let's skip down to verse 24. Teach me, and I will hold my tongue, and cause me to understand wherein I have erred. How forcible are right words. You know, he says, if you guys had the answer to this thing, it would be really helpful and it would be really meaningful to me. How forcible are right words. I don't need criticism at this point. Then he says, look in verse 26. Do ye imagine to reprove words and the speeches of one that is desperate, which are as the wind? Yea, ye overwhelm the fatherless, and ye dig a pit for your friend. Now therefore be content, look upon me. For it is evident unto you if I lie. Return, I pray you, let it not be iniquity. Yea, return again my righteousness in it. Is there iniquity in my tongue, and cannot my taste discern perverse things? He says, fellas, don't you think I would know if I had done something wrong? Don't you think I've got enough wisdom to understand that if what you're telling me is right, and that your theory is that I have done something wrong, and that's why all these bad things are happening to me? He says, don't you guys, he's getting a little aggravated with them here towards the end of chapter 6. He says, don't you think I got enough brains to figure out that if I had done something wrong? That's what he's saying here. He says in verse 29, or verse 30, he says, is there iniquity in my tongue? He says, have I said something wrong? And then he says, cannot my taste discern perverse things? He said, don't you think I would have been able to tell? Don't you think wouldn't it have been a whole lot easier if right from the beginning, when all these bad things happened to me, I could say, oh, I know what this is all about. Oh yeah, I need to confess it to God. He said, but fellas, I'm not stupid. I know my life. And I'm telling you, if there was something wrong, I would know it. So don't come and tell me that you think there's something wrong in my life, and that's why I'm going through this. I've already been there. I've already suffered with this thing for 7 days. I've already gone through this thing over and over again into my mind. Remember the old records that used to get a scratch in them and they would get stuck in a groove? Now you'd have to be old enough to understand, what records are and grooves and scratches and all that. But it would get stuck in a groove and it would play that one thing over and over again, and you'd have to go and just tap the record player with your finger like that, or touch the arm of the needle to get it to move on. And he said, Job's saying that. He said, look, I've already rehearsed this thing in my mind. He said, you guys surely understand that if I did something wrong, I would know it. I would be able to discern it, and I would have already done something like that. And so he says, let's go to chapter 7. Verse 1, he said, is there not an appointed time to man upon the earth? And are not his days also like the days of an hireling? He said, doesn't each man have a job to do on earth and a certain time to do it? When you hire someone to do a job, if you get a contractor to come in and do some work for you, well, one of the things you're going to ask him is, how long is this going to take? And Job says, every man has a job upon this earth, and there's a certain number of days. And Job was saying, well, I wonder, what he's saying here is, I wonder if my days are ended. I wonder if this is the end for me. Because he surely can't come up with any kind of an answer why all this is happening to him. So he's figuring, okay, every man is put on this earth for a reason, and maybe my reason is done, maybe my job is done, and I'm coming down to the end of my time. Look at verse 2. He said, as a servant earnestly desireth the shadow, and as a hireling looketh for the reward of his work. He says, I'm kind of like the fella in the field, and he's working hard all day, and he's getting tired, and he's waiting for that sun to go down to where he can start seeing the shadows, and he knows the day is almost over, and he's done with his work, and he can go home and rest. He said, I'm just like that servant who's looking for the shadow. Maybe this is the end of my life, Job is saying. Maybe that's why this has come upon me. And then look at verse 3. He says, so am I made to possess months of vanity, and wearisome nights are appointed to me. He said, evidently, Job says, he's been suffering for a long time, and his nights seem long, and there's no way to gauge them. During the daytime, you can tell, how the day is progressing. You know that the sun, is on the eastern side of your house in the morning, and then in the middle of the day, you don't have any sunshine maybe coming directly in your window in the evening. But at night, there's no way to know. Yeah, you ever been sick at night, or you try to go to sleep at night, and you're having trouble going to sleep at night, and you lay there for a while, and you think, wow, surely it's got to be like 4 o'clock in the morning, and you wake up and look at the clock and it's only midnight. Because there's no way to gauge the night. There's no way to know how far along you are into the night unless you look at a clock. And Job is saying that the same thing here in verse 3. He says, so am I made to possess months of vanity, and wearisome nights are appointed to me. When I lie down, I say, when shall I arise and the night be gone? And am I full of tossings to and fro until the dawning of the day? Job says, I can't even rest at night because of all this stuff. It would be different if okay, I'm suffering during the daytime. And when I talk to people who are suffering, when I visited Ms. Dina this past week in her home, and she was telling me about her shoulder, and I always say, can you sleep at night? And she said, oh yes, I can. So it's one thing to suffer with an ailment, and it's one thing to have an injury. If you can rest at night, that's good, okay? But if you got something that bothers you all day long, and you can't sleep at night because of the thing, that's when it starts wearing on you and starts draining your energy and draining your strength. And Job said that. He said, when I lie down, I say, when shall I arise and the night be gone? He's laying in bed saying, man, when is this night going to get over with? He's trying to rest. He's trying to get some rest for his body. And he can't even rest at night because of all these things that are going through his mind and the sores all over his body. And so that's what he's saying there. And I'm full of tossings to and fro until the dawning of the day. Look at verse 5. He says, my flesh is clothed with worms and clods of dust. My skin is broken and become loathsome. He's got this disease that God allowed Satan to give to him, which gave him sores, boils from the top of his head down to the bottom of his feet. And they don't go away just because it's nighttime. And he's dealing with these sores all day long and all night long. That's what he's saying here. Then look at verse 7. Oh, remember that my life is wind. Mine eye shall no more see good. He's getting to the point, he says, I wonder if there's going to be an end to this thing. He said, I wonder if I'm ever going to get out of this. Am I going to spend the rest of my life with these sores all over my body? And so God is giving us in chapter 7 in the book of Job a little bit of a look into the heart of somebody who's suffering and what they go through, how it pains them all day long, how they think that maybe this is the end of their life. And then at night when they're trying to rest, that they can't even rest because they're struggling. They're tossing to and fro and they can't rest at night because of all the struggles that they go through. Then let's continue reading here. Look at verse 8. The eye of him hath seen me, shall see me no more. Thine eyes are upon me, and I am not. As the cloud is consumed and vanisheth away, so he that goeth down to the grave shall come up no more. He shall return no more to his house, neither shall his place know him any more. Job's saying, I wonder if I could ever go back home again. Am I going to end up living in this ash heap at the edge of the city for the rest of my days until I die? All these, it's like discouragement is starting to set in with him. And then Job's complaint. Look at verse 12. He said, am I a sea or a whale that thou settest a watch over me? He said, I feel like a fish in an aquarium, and God's just sitting up there watching me suffer. And that's the words he used. He said, am I a whale in the sea, and thou hast set a watch over me? He said, God, are you just up in heaven looking down and watching me go through all this stuff? So, sort of like somebody would watch a whale in the ocean as he's going around and just sit there and they can't do anything for him. They can't help him. All they just do is watch. And he said, God, is that what's going on with you? So Job's starting to complain to God. Remember, he does not lose his faith in God, but he's human enough to go ahead and complain to God and open up his heart to God and tell God what he's thinking. Look at verse 13. When I say, my bed shall comfort me, and my couch shall ease my complaint, then thou scarest me with dreams and terrifieth me with visions. He must have had some kind of fever going on with these sores and boils, because usually when you have visions and dreams, you ever been real bad sick and you have these goofy dreams at night when you're going, a lot of that's if you have a fever. And Job says, it's bad enough that I can't rest at night, but when I do fall asleep a little bit, he says, thou scarest me with dreams and terrifieth me through visions. He's complaining to God. He says, God, I'm struggling here. He said, I can't even sleep at night. And sometimes when I do fall asleep, I get these strange visions and dreams, and probably because of the disease that's racked his body with all these sores that are going from the top of his head down to the bottom of his feet. Then look at verse 15. So that my soul chooses strangling and death rather than my life. I loathe it. I would not live away. Let me alone, for my days are vanity. He's getting to the point where he's saying, God, just do something. Take my life. Let's get this thing over with. I'm tired of dealing with this thing. Then verse 17, he says, what is man that thou shouldest magnify him, and that thou shouldest set thine heart upon him? He's saying, God, why would you, the creator of the universe, be so concerned with little old me? I mean, Job's saying, look, I'm just one person upon this earth. God, why are you focusing so much on me? It's sort of like when you get in trouble as a kid, and you ever have one of those days where I remember I had one of those days when I was in first grade. I got the giggles one day, and I just could not stop laughing. Something struck my funny bone that morning, and I would sit there in class, and my teacher said, Jerry, that's enough of that. And I'd be sitting in class, and I'd look over at one of my friends, and he'd do something, and I'm trying not to, and I'd start laughing again. And the teacher got so mad at me about the third time of that, and I just couldn't control myself. And the teacher got so mad, she sent me down to the principal's office. I'll never forget this. First time I ever got sent to the principal's office, and I thought, oh my goodness, this is bad. But Job says, what is man that thou shouldest magnify him, that thou shouldest set thine heart upon him? What Job is saying here is like that day when I kept getting in trouble in school. I thought to the teacher, why do you keep watching me? You didn't see him when he was making me laugh? I mean, why am I the focus? You have 30 kids in this classroom, and why am I the one that you keep watching? Or you keep catching me doing something wrong. Why don't you focus your attention on somebody else? And Job is saying that to God. He said, God, who am I? Who am I living on? Why are you focusing so much attention upon me? Why am I going through this deep time? Look at verse 18. And that thou shouldest visit him every morning and try him every moment. He said, God, whatever you're putting me through here, he says, why? It's like with me every time. Every morning I wake up, it's there. I try to go to bed, it's there. I'm suffering with this thing. But God, of all the people that are upon the planet Earth, why are you focusing all your attention upon me? Then look at verse 19. How long wilt thou not depart from me, nor let me alone till I swallow down my spittle? I have sinned. What shall I do unto thee? Now here, Job now this is not a confession here. Remember, his friend tried to tell him, Job, you must have done something wrong for all these bad things to happen. You need to confess your sin to God. When Job said this, it's sort of like, okay, maybe I've sinned. Job has got to the point where he just doesn't know what to say. He doesn't know, so when he says, I have sinned, and Bible commentators all agree on this, Job is not confessing to God, okay, God, I've sinned. No, he's just saying, after you hear something over and over again, you finally, well, okay, maybe it's so. Maybe it's so. He says, I have sinned. What shall I do unto thee, O thou preserver of men? Why hast thou set me as a mark against thee, so that I am a burden to myself? And why dost thou not pardon my transgression and take away mine iniquity? For now I shall sleep in the dust, and thou shalt seek me in the morning, but I shall not be. He says, God, I just wish I would die tonight. He said, I'm just really, and you know what? Job is really getting down to the very end of his rope here at this point. Now, those of you who read the book of Job, you know that God pulls him through all that. But you see how close Job gets to the point where that's it. I'm done. Okay, maybe I've sinned. So God, what do you want me to do? Just take my life. Hopefully I won't see the morning. Let's have a word of prayer, and we'll continue this lesson on next week as we continue to study the book of Job. But look, just remember one thing. Look around you today at church. You'll see people that are nicely dressed. You'll see people with smiles on their faces, but they're somewhere in they're hurting somewhere in their life. Everybody's got problems. Everybody's got something that burdens with them. Don't judge each other. Don't try to figure out why a person's going through something. Just pull alongside and be a friend and try to encourage them, as Job really wished that his friends would have done.